and we will start our discussion for today. Good afternoon, students, once again. And as part of our discussion, we will continue with the elastic disk provisioning architecture. In the previous architectures, we had discussed about load balancing and cloud busting architectures very well. But this architecture, currently what we are discussing is entirely about the storage part. Not only this, the next architecture also what we'll be discussing will be related to the storage part only. Okay, so that's the agenda for the day. Probably we'll be thinking about how the storage factor will be considered for designing these architectures, isn't it, right? Okay, coming on to this, the first one, that is elastic disk provisioning. What happens here is, first let us understand how the cloud functions and how the cloud bills their customers in terms of their service rendering. Okay, so when it comes to the storage allocation, usually people think that if I am consuming 3 GB or 4 GB of data, then I'll be charged only to that 3 GB or 4 GB of space. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. Usually, when you come up with a certain agreement, you will be mentioning how much is the space you will be requiring. Definitely, you will be mentioning it. Like it's something like it's a kind of configuration what you would like to opt when you go for purchasing a laptop or a phone or something like that, isn't it? So you have certain specifications that I need this much amount of memory, I need this much amount of RAM and other things, isn't it? Okay, so exclusively I'll be talking here about only the storage part, that is exclusively memory part only. Okay, so that is storage areas. So usually in the cloud, according to the agreement, what happens is, if you are seeking, say, 100 GB of space from the cloud, okay, you will be ending up with paying to that 100 GB entirely. Now, the catch point here is whether the 100 GB is really being consumed by the consumer. That's the thing. If not, how the things should be gracefully being available for the consumer. Why I call this as a gracefully to be available for the consumer? Because in this scenario, the provider is the beneficiary, most benefited for that matter. Coming onto the consumer end, he is not benefited. He is not benefited. It is something like how you get the network bandwidth per day. Network bandwidth per day. Like most of the Geo plans, you will be seeing that you will be getting 1.5 GB per day, and it's up to you whether you use it or not, isn't it, right? But still, if you don't use also, you will be ending up paying it, isn't it, right? Definitely you have to pay. So no one is stopping you to consume. That's a different story. But if you don't have such requirement, then why should you pay that? Why should you pay that? Of course. So here, who is the benefited? At most, Geo person is the benefited, isn't it, right? But as a what is a service consumer, maybe you wanted this 1.5 GB of data or 2 GB of data for only 7 days in a month. You will not be getting that in such a fashion, isn't it? You have to subscribe it for a month or at least a month. I guess it should be. That's how is the case, isn't it? Similarly, I can give one more example. Of course, now Gmail is free for usage, but the maximum storage you can use is 15 GB, isn't it? Now, if you need additionally much more space, then probably you might be needing additional space, like another 2 GB should be sufficient for you. But Gmail will not bill you only for the 2 GB. It will be giving another 15 GB, and it's up to you whether you use it or not, isn't it? So who is most benefited? It's Gmail, not the end user, isn't it, right? So what clearly we are observing is the cloud providers are taking it to the benefit, but not the cloud consumers, So in order to provide much more beneficiary to the consumer end, the architecture has to be designed in such a way that the cloud consumer is being billed only for their usage. That means in case of Gmail, if I'm using only additional 2 GB, then I should be ending up paying for that additional 2 GB. You got it. Similarly, if I'm using only 7 days a month, 1.5 GB, rest of all the days I might be using only 500 GB or so. Okay, then in such a case, okay, sorry, I had told reverse, is it? So 7 days a month, I'll be using 1.5 GB. In rest of the cases, I'll be using only 500 MB. Then I should be paying for that 500 MB most of the time, and only when I use 1.5 GB, then I should pay for that, isn't it? Okay. So this architecture aims to facilitate consumer, the cloud consumer, to pay exactly for what he uses it, for what he uses it. Okay. So usually what happens in the storage part is when the business is running, you don't know exactly how many customers you'll be receiving and how many or else how much amount of data space you'll be ending up with. So thinking about the future, okay, they will, the business people, okay, the business architects I can call, they'll be planning in such a way that additional resources might be, they'll be keeping it ready for usage, isn't it? Okay. Now, how these resources are being actually allocated is something like, there will be racks, okay. All these racks will be having certain virtual machines, and on this virtual machines, even before that, all these racks will be having the physical entities. On this physical entity, you'll be coming up with a virtual entity, where these virtual entities are called as the storage units. That is nothing but the databases, isn't it? Right? So you will be storing depending upon the data that is coming in. Okay, so that means each and every rack will be providing certain amount of storage spaces to the consumers, certain storage spaces to the consumers. Now, you can ask me a question, sir. You are thinking about only the cloud consumers benefit, but not cloud providers and benefit. So he is investing lot amount of money, and why he should not be the most benefited? I can tell you on that. As per the SLA, we say that 100 GB, okay, coming back to our first example, like 100 GB of space is needed, but there is a clause in SLA that 100 GB will be allocated according to the usage scale. That means the moment when when the client starts using, all the 100 GB will not be allocated, isn't it? That's the cloud provider's benefit. So, but at any point of time, he can scale up to 100 GB of space, isn't it? So the allocation is not happening. So why the cloud provider should be benefited without the allocation? So there is injustice, isn't it? That's the reason. Okay, there should be a common, win-win kind of situation for the provider as well as the consumer. Okay, so thinking about that. Okay, so this architecture has been devised. So the motive of this architecture, as I told you, it will be only for consumer should be paying for what exactly he is using. How this mechanism will be working upon, we will discuss. Okay. So what happens here is, in this architecture, there is a technology, something called as thin provisioning technology, and this technology will be taking care of allocation of the spaces, allocation of the storage spaces. So what is this thin provisioning technology? Is nothing but it's a logic. It's basically a programming logic. Okay, so this logic identifies when the allocation of the storage space should be happening or not, and how much is the allocation space being consumed. So this will be taken care by this thin provisioning. Okay, and for the input for this thin provisioning program is the runtime statistics. The runtime statistics definitely, to do this dynamic allocation. Okay, definitely it has to understand what is the consumption level of the existing resource, isn't it? Okay, so runtime statistics will be helping the thin provisioning technology or else the program to understand what is the usage level and allocate the memory space if and then needed. You got it? Okay, so that's about the thin provisioning technology. Okay, usually what happens here is at every point of time, here as it is shown in the diagram. Okay, cloud consumer will be sending out request, and definitely there will be something called as pay-per-use monitor. Okay, which has to closely observe how this resources are being observed. okay, to calculate how much is the cost that has to be, charged for the consumer, isn't it, right? Okay, so this pay-per-use monitor will be exactly looking into the, how the resources are being consumed, and it collects all the statistics of the usages, definitely, okay, and these usage statistics will be sent to the thin provisioning program, and this thin provisioning program will decide whether to allocate the storage space or not. And if it feels that yes, storage space has to be allocated, then it will be triggering hypervisor to create additional resources for the storage purpose. And if the hypervisor creates it, then it starts allocating the additional storage space. Remember, after a thin provisioning program triggering to replicate the resources in the hypervisor, if it does not do that replication, then the program, this thin provisioning program, will not have any resources to allocate the memory. At the time it breaks. At that time it breaks. So this thing, I mean, the hypervisor should be very alert enough to take care of the replication mechanisms. That's quite common in each and every architecture. It should be providing the resources, necessary resources, as and when it is required, as and when it gets the alerts to create it, isn't it, right? Okay, so that's the elastic disk provisioning architecture. Why we call this as disk provisioning? Because this thin provisioning program will be allotting the storage in terms of disks, like how you people will be changing your hard disk, isn't it? If one hard disk is full, or say one memory disk is full, automatically you'll be changing, isn't it? Okay, that's how the elastic disk provisioning architecture will be working. And major benefit of this is the consumer can get exactly charged for what they are used. Okay, and they could be getting, what to say, granular billing, we can be calling that as, to the minute level of the usage. Okay, you can break down the bill. Okay, that's how the elastic disk provisioning architecture will be functioning. Now, coming on to the mechanisms that can be helping, you could see that this architecture is already equipped with, hypervisor, pay-per-use monitor, and a listening entity also, isn't it, right? But apart from that, cloud usage monitor has to be present, and the resource replication. Definitely, cloud usage monitor adds more statistical information for the thin provisioning program, so that it can take care of how much of the usage, or else what level of usage, not exactly the how much, but the level of usage varies. The level of usage varies, like like storing 1 GB of data 100 times is equivalent to 100 GB only. Okay, and storing 100 GB of data in single time is also 100 GB only. So if I calculate, if I see that in terms of the statistics, okay, only 100 GB of the space is being used, but how many times this particular server has to get the hits in 1 GB of data 100 times, so it has to go for 100 hits, isn't it? But in the other case, that is 100 GB at one time, it requires only one hit. Agreed or not? Okay, so that's how the usage statistics has to be analyzed, and accordingly the provisioning should be happening. That is, the disk provisioning should be happening. And obviously, the second mechanism, what you could see, is the resource replication, without which the disk replication, what the mechanism we are referring to here, and without which hypervisor cannot be facilitating the resources for the replication. You got it? That's about this elastic disk provisioning architecture. Now, moving on to the next architecture, that is redundant storage architecture. The principle behind this redundant storage architecture is very, very simple. It's like, the backup copies, how you will be preparing. It is something like, there is a joke I have heard long time back. So a person who is traveling in a city bus will purchase 2 tickets. Then his friend asks, why are you purchasing 2 tickets from a single person? Then he says, okay, I'm taking one more additional ticket as a backup, that is safe. If anyone steals my ticket, then I should have a backup, isn't it? So that's what he says. So Then this other person will ask, what if you lose the second ticket as well? Then he says, already I have the bus pass. Okay, already I have the bus pass. In addition to the bus pass, I am going with these two tickets. So that's a kind of what to say, ati jagrata antaru kadandi in Telugu. So that's taking too much or else worrying too much about their entities, isn't it? So similar to that, okay, similar to that extent, okay, here the redundant storage architecture worries about the data storage in terms of redundancy. That means here the cloud provider want to ensure not only cloud provider, either he can be the cloud consumer as well, whoever it is, either the provider or the consumer. They wanted to ensure that there is no breakage in the storage service accessibility. There is no breakage in the storage service accessibility. Here, why I call this as accessibility? Because I can, if I have a storage device, either I can write into it, or I can retrieve certain data into it, or I can modify certain data, or else I can delete the data. All crude operations I can be doing on it. You got it? Okay. So these failures are not allowed while accessing to the databases. So in other words, in pure and pure technical words, I can be calling it as a failure should be avoided for the storage access. That is it. Okay. So to avoid these these failures to the storage, it is opted to go with the redundant database, or else the redundant storage part, where same amount of data or else the duplicate amount of data will be present. Got it. Okay, so let's see how this architecture functions. Basically, in the cloud, the storage units will be calling it as LUNs, like how we'll be calling for the hard disk, you will be calling in terms of the GBs, and for the what to say RAM, you'll be obviously you'll be calling in terms of GBs again. Okay, so in terms of data centers, you'll be calling in terms of what is the terabytes. You know, that's the units, isn't it? Okay. Similarly, in the cloud, if you are referring to a storage unit, then that is called as logical unit number. That is called as logical unit number. Okay, so each and every logical drive that is present in the cloud, or else that is allocated as a resource in the cloud, will be in terms of a LUN. In short, it is called as LUN, L-U-N. That is nothing but logical unit number. Okay, so here in the diagram, you can see four boxes are there, four boxes with different colors. One is at olive green, another one is teal green, another one is purple, and another one is navy blue or something. Okay, so all these are logical unit numbers. Four LUNs we can be calling. Now these LUNs can be gaining the access through the means of certain gateway, and we call that gateway as a storage service gateway. Why? Because this is again an service that caters the accessibility to the LUNs, So how these actually function? How this actually function is, see on the slide, you can see there are two diagrams. Coming on to the first diagram, you could see that on the physical storage device, there are certain LUNs, that is three LUNs have been created. Okay, and the access to this LUNs will be through the means of the gateway. Okay, so whenever the gateway receives certain request, it will be diverting all those requests to the physical storage device, where in turn they are diverted to the logical unit numbers. That is agreed. But also, along with the primary storage device, there has been a secondary storage device. And see here, okay, there is a secondary storage device with equivalent amount of LUNs, Why this is? Because this is the redundant storage area. So this secondary storage is the redundant area, isn't it? It is duplicate area. Okay. So in this duplicate area, you could find again the same logical unit numbers are being stored. Okay. So what is the benefit of this is, whenever the storage gateway receives a request, and unfortunately it identifies that primary storage device is not accessible, then it has to take care of those requests, isn't it? So it will be diverting to the secondary storage device. Understood? It will be diverting to the secondary storage device, where the secondary storage device again, in turn, it will be having the LUNs, isn't it? So the service request will be passing on to the LUNs. Okay, that service request can be any one of the CRUD operations, that is CRUD operations, isn't it? Okay, so it can be any one of such operations. Got it? Okay, so that's how the storage redundant storage architecture works. Basically, it's a kind of backup. Basically, it's a kind of backup, isn't it? Right? So how this? Don't you understand that primary storage and the secondary storage should be always in sync? Definitely, they are supposed to be in sync, and their synchronization should also be in terms of LUNs only, not according to the devices. Not according to the devices. It should be according to the LUNs. It should be according to the LUNs. So, for example, I've created. I have a laptop now, and I have created 3 partitions on my laptop. One is C drive, which is exclusively used for operating system. Another one is D drive, where I store all my, academic thing and all other things. And E drive is where I store all the movies and music. And let me include another drive, F drive also, where I'll be storing the family information or else any data related to other family members, isn't it? So unfortunately, I see that because of some reason I need to change the laptop. So I have I have bought a new laptop and I have started creating the partitions. Now, how do you think I'll be going ahead with the partitions? I'll be exactly doing the partitions how I had in the old laptop, don't you? Definitely, isn't it? We'll be following the same method. That means in the new laptop also, I'll be creating the partition C, D, E, F, and I wish to store in the same way. That is, again, I'll be going for a C drive to store for the operating system, D drive for academics, E drive for films and movies and music, and F drive is for the family members' data. In the similar sense only, okay, I would like to store. So when I am taking the backup, okay, I'll be taking entire drive as it is, and I will just dump onto the new thing. Agreed? Agreed or not? Okay, so similarly the same fashion, okay, the LUN also will be dumping the entire LUN's data onto the redundant LUN, onto the redundant LUN. The benefit by doing this is, it is easy for you to retrieve the data and store the data even when it is old and new. That means you will not be feeling any difference whether you are accessing a new storage area or else you are accessing the old storage area. Definitely, that sort of differences should not be there. By the way, okay, that sort of differences is not at all allowed. And these kind of replication has to be taken care. Okay, in this way, the LUNs replication or else the storage replication will be happening. Remember, this is the icon. This is the icon for storage replication. Okay, in every architecture you come across this kind of icon, and you means that it means that the replication mechanism is being happening here in this. Okay, now coming on to the maintenance of this redundant storages. Okay, usually people take care of redundancies in distributed geographic locations. Reason I will tell you. See, if I'm having one copy here in this location, and because of some power failure or some other thing, okay, I'm not able to access, then is there any meaning in maintaining the redundant data also in the same location? No. Why? Because if I have also, same will be the case. If I have also, then I will not be having power to access it. If power is a problem for primary storage device accessibility. You got it? Okay. So that's the reason the redundant storage it should be distributed globally. Okay. And the second one is the replication mechanism. That is the synchronization that happens here, and the kind of protocols that can be used for here will be, entirely they can go on their specific what to say protocols and synchronization mechanisms. It is not necessarily that, okay, I have a mechanism here that will be following in the United States, and it's not necessarily that same kind of mechanism should be followed there in the Asia Pacific. Okay, but the protocol might be one and the same, and the synchronization methods might be varied. Okay, so it's not about the geographical locations, but I could say that it is the matter of the operators or else the service providers or else the storage mechanisms. That is nothing but the database mechanisms. You got it? Okay, so I don't mind what the synchronization method and what the protocol that I'll be using for accessing such data from the original storage device and from the redundant storage device. But basically, there should be a storage controller who can be taking care of the redundancy levels. That means the controller should be ensuring that the redundant storage device, okay, has all the information with respect to the primary storage device. So all these are all purely technical entities, but we'll not be going much deeper about how these synchronization works, how the storage controller will be working, and how does the geographical compliance can be achieved in getting the synchronization when the redundant storage devices are distributed across the globe. Okay, so we will not worry about all the technical details how these will be working, but just do understand that there is this kind of technicalities there, and it makes the the architecture into existence. Got it? Okay. So with this, I'm done with the